My name is Sim Vandala, and the intention of this channel is twofold. The first is to share my experiences, and the second is to share my access to information. What you can expect will be videos highlighting some of the concepts I've been implementing for quite some time, and conversations with people that have given me the means to implement these concepts. These conversations will take shape as a podcast called the Metanoia Discourses. Metanoia is an ancient Greek word that encapsulates the journey of change, whether that is your mind, heart, self, as in your sense of self, or your way of life. So discourse is an old word used for dialogue, and really dialogue is what philosophy is originally built around. So in philosophy, this idea, it was about spiritual conversion, and that is not the modern interpretation of religion or spirituality per se, but it's much more about this change that takes place deep in the psyche, which is said to house the spirit. In this day and age, podcasts can be seen as an extension of the original premise of philosophy, which was in its core around dialogue and not about exegesis, which means discussing the origins of a text or discussing a text and providing a theoretical framework around texts. So the original premise of philosophy is really about a way of life, and what I hope to do with this podcast and the conversations is to give you the means to move forward on your journey of change and growth. As I started with, I take my access to information for granted, and I take it for granted because of the time, money, and effort that I've invested into finding and assimilating this information. There have been many times where in my line of work and personal life I've gotten into dialogue about things that I thought were obvious, but then it turned out they weren't. And they aren't obvious because not everyone has the access to information or lack the time and willingness to delve into it. So when I share my experiences, I fulfill both intentions. Why am I doing this? So I've been contemplating doing something like this for a while. However, I told myself I wouldn't until I could enter this sphere with my own spin on things. One of my favorite pastimes is reading philosophy, Stoic philosophy in particular, which turned out to be the spin I was looking for. So approaching things with a philosophical lens on the journey we all go through of change and growth, which is the approach that I'm gunning for here. Like, I've had quite the journey of my own, which I'll most likely highlight in a video exclusively focused on my journey. In order to understand why I do this, we'll need to understand what I've been through and how much I've changed, right? Before, like, each one of these things will be further elaborated on as the podcast episodes and the videos keep rolling out. So it will get much more of the emphasis it deserves. This is kind of more serves as a synopsis and a summary of what I've been through. So more will come. So I was born with childhood autism spectrum disorder, which led to having major depressive disorder, which also came with anxiety in the form of PTSD due to the stress that comes with a rough childhood because of not just someone that was on the spectrum, but also issues with my father and with schools and everything else that comes with living a life. So the first thing that's important to understand in all of this is that all of these terms, are really just collection terms, right? So that means that not each form of autism, anxiety, depression is caused by the same thing or experienced the same way. There's many different parameters we need to look at when it comes to all of these terms. So when we look at autism spectrum disorder, for instance, the majority of the cases seem to stem from the development issues in the fetus in both the gut microbiome and access to its essential nutrients and inflammation or heavy metal. So basically anything that's toxic from the environment that the mother would have that could lead to any type of disruption of the normal development of the fetus, right? Saying that most neurotransmitters are made in the gut and your gut is technically your first brain. We can see how neurological deficits would occur if there's a gut or nutrient absorption issue. The point is that many different parameters need to be taken into account for any of these collections terms and their different spectra, right? So people in that are depressed fall on a different spectrum. Everyone experiences it in a different way. Same with anxiety, right? You could have minor, you can have major. There's a spectrum in all of these things, right? So perhaps some of the insights will be helpful and applicable to you. Maybe others won't be so applicable to you. I started my own journey because of the deep desire to heal myself, and when I did, I found that the intention had shifted to one of curiosity instead of one of being victimized by what I was going through and needing to find a way out. Right? So if mending my childhood autism spectrum disorder, depression, anxiety, and PTSD was possible, I asked myself, what else is possible? Right, I've been on this journey to understand myself, my health, and to maximize my strength, my muscle mass, and to push the limits of what I think is possible or perceived to be possible, of my genetic constraints and even my beliefs. As wordy as that curiosity and intention sounds, I've been met with setback after setback, which actually brings me to the importance of sharing my experiences, because I want to show how I've navigated these setbacks, these plateaus, these obstacles, and these injuries. Furthermore, I want to bring in people who have done the same, who have overcome their setbacks, their plateaus, and their injuries, and that they can give us all something to reflect on and to use on our journey. So my first step on this journey was my initial loss of 16 kilograms in 6 months, which is about 35 pounds for anyone listening that isn't used to the metric system. I changed my nutrition, I started healing my gut, I introduced really basic exercise, which was running stairs, so that's my first foray into movement. This evolved into getting into fasting, after I read the Warrior Diet, and then starting with basic calisthenics, which was something that was getting quite popular on YouTube, and I needed to do something else except for running stairs, and I wanted to get stronger. Not too long after, I got introduced to Krav Maga, which is an Israeli self-defense system, and I got hooked on that. Things are going really well outside of the physical things like getting healthier and losing fat and gaining muscle. I was also developing in the system. I was grading, so doing levels, which is like a belt, but you get a patch instead, where you test and then you reach a certain level. So I was up 3 levels from when I started until I tore my ACL in multiple places, having to have the surgery to reconstruct it, and which includes a graft. So my reaction to the surgery wasn't very good at all. I had a lot of issues, internal bleeding. I was really reacting to the surgery very poorly. My leg was super swollen, and I was bedridden for 2 weeks because I couldn't really move. And so I got things started getting bad again. I started getting depressed, and I used alcohol and painkillers to cope with everything that was going on. I mean, not seeing my friends, not being able to move, especially not being able to do the thing I love, which was Krav Maga. So the rehab was extremely painful. It was very much a grind where I had to be at the physical therapist twice a week for multiple hours. And that's next to the rehab I was trying to do myself at home. But I was determined to get back to Krav Maga. So it got me to cycle through periods of doing what was right for me and periods where I was lack. So I would cycle through these periods of extreme discipline, like doing my rehab, to, as my rehab started going better, to being more relaxed, which led into going out and drinking again. But with my knee not being fully recovered, I had a few incidents that made my rehab even longer. My first big achievement was completing the Krav Maga Instructor course at Krav Maga Global, and shortly thereafter getting my personal trainer certification. My prospects in Belgium were quite bleak, so I decided to apply for personal training jobs in Norway. Eventually I got a call to come over for an interview, and that's an opportunity I took with both hands. Moving to Norway was a leap of faith, but the prospects in Oslo were far better than in Antwerp back in the day. I worked as a personal trainer in a big chain in Oslo, and I was also welcome to instruct Krav Maga there. As usual, things went fine for a while. The setbacks that I did have were mainly because of overuse injuries, and they often kept nagging. So right before I was set to do my expert level 1, which is the Krav Maga equivalent of a black belt, I dislocated my left shoulder with a 16 kilo kettlebell as I went into a windmill. So I had a partial anterior shoulder dislocation. So even though that went down in April, I still went to Israel in June, committed to doing the test regardless of the results. And the test was pretty grueling because of the shoulder injury. I was in constant pain. I got some decent painkillers anyway, and I got food poisoned a few days before the test. So I wasn't running on a lot of food, barely any really. So the shoulder injury was a catalyst for growth, and it really pushed me deeper into philosophy to deal with the injury and everything around it. My scope of thinking started getting broader, and I started reading more and more about how the body worked, biology, chronobiology, and everything else I could get my hands on that is health related. I found myself more and more at odds with the gym chain where I worked because I felt like I couldn't offer my clients what I thought they needed, especially as I started getting more aware of the involvement of the nervous system and breath and cold exposure. So the conflicts at the gym started increasing, and then I just handed in my resignation to focus full-time on Krav Maga. The doing Krav Maga full-time for me didn't turn out to be very sustainable, and one of the major reasons being that my left shoulder, kept getting aggravated by doing personal sessions. So my shoulder just wasn't in a state to do that full time, and it didn't get the space to heal if it's constantly being tugged on or holding pads or rolling around or being manipulated. So it was a very challenging thing to let go of something I've invested nearly a decade in of my time and effort, and especially something that I committed most of my income and time to. After quitting at the Krav Maga place where I was teaching, I really was lost for a while on what to do, though I already had part of the puzzle figured out, which was actually what made me want to quit my standard personal training job in the first place, even though I didn't have the full overview of how these puzzle pieces would fit together. So I did come to the conclusion that what I wanted to do was address the person on all possible dimensions. That meant physiologically and psychologically. Unbeknownst to me, that was actually the holistic approach that I was going for, to treat a person as a function of the whole organism with all the parameters that come into play with that. As I got into this, I got clients through an old personal training client of mine who went on board with this approach, and then he got me other clients, and then it sort of developed into the niche of coaching high performers. And these high performers, they're CEOs, hedge fund managers, entrepreneurs, and businessmen, all people that can use these tools and my experiences and everything that I've consolidated and assimilated information-wise to help them deal with the stressors of their lives and help them deal with things that they haven't dealt with before and improve their well-beings through nutrition, through breathing, through meditation. It's anything to give them the edge in their daily lives and in their businesses, but also just in how they go through their lives. Right. So as to why I refer to what I do as holistic consulting is because it's far more to me than just coaching. Because with my clients, I talk about everything from their relationships to their kids, to their finances, to their psychological well-being, and everything health related. Because in the end, it's all health related, and the life we live is an extension of the state of the organism, which lands us in present day. That I'm keen to expose you guys to all of these things that I use for my clients, and that everyone I converse with in the metanoia discourses will either have given me a piece of the puzzle in these concepts that I've used, or they've used the same set of concepts and intentions and insights into their approach in their way of life and how they interact with their clients. So each one of these conversations will open up plenty of rabbit holes which you can go down to. And the overarching point of the entire channel is to make videos on these key concepts that could help you further on your journey to change your way of life.